Okay. You should be recording now. And there we go. All right.
Great. Good morning, everyone. Apologize for the technical difficulties. We will call the meeting to order by taking roll call. Savarese.
Here.
Happy birthday. Karen
No.
Gardner.
I'm here.
It's Dan's birthday.
Dorothy.
That's what it meant.
I'm here.
Thank you.
You're cutting out, Paul. We can't really hear you.
On. My mic's on.
We can hear Vera.
Did the owl fall off the branch?
I think Paul's mic might not be working.
There you go.
Oh, okay, there we go.
Can you hear me, guys?
We can hear you, Vera.
We can
but we're
hear
not-
Vera
hear
fine.
Paul.
Say something.
Yes.
Can you hear me now?
Not yet.
Yes,
Oh, you're echoing.
echo.
Yeah, I'll leave mine on.
Okay. Yours is on. Mine is the owl's on. Take your mic off.
And now we can't hear
I
it.
can't hear anything.
My suggestion would be to unplug the owl entirely and just have everybody go on their own laptops if they can.
Yes. What the suggestion we've made all along? Here's the only issue, Dan. If each person is on their laptop and they all have their audio
everyone hear
on,
me
you'll
now?
get it. Yes.
I get it, Dorothy. Yes. Yes.
Okay,
Tara, we're good. Tara, go back.
okay, we will complete the roll call. Kristen O'Malley,
Here.
Nope.
Paul, you're muted.
You're muted.
Lisa Guyon, Sean Gonzalez.
Here.
Great. Well, we are all here.
Hang on. Go ahead.
Next up is the approval of the minutes from the July 28th, 22 meeting. We'll take another roll call for approval of the minutes. Dorothy Savarese?
But I think you need a motion, sir.
Yes, please.
And a second, so I'll be happy to make that motion.
Second.
Okay, Dorothy,
Aye.
Dan,
Aye.
Karen,
Aye.
Wendy,
Aye.
Kristen,
Abstain, I wasn't there.
Lisa was also not there. Okay, Sean.
Aye.
Great, the minutes have been approved. Third on the agenda this morning is discussion of any ARPA-related questions that we would have to run by our consultants. We have none from the last meeting, so we can move on to the meat of today's meeting, which is to review and discuss the large project testimony and where we want to go from here on the issues of housing and water quality. And really sort of looking at the end game for this committee, which would hopefully to be able to wrap up some sort of report to the commissioners in September. So I think this will be more of an open discussion based on the testimony that's come in today. And just as a review, though, we've identified the components of the housing regional challenge. So addressing homelessness, affordable attainable housing, workforce housing, and regional planning. So does that seem to encompass the testimony that we've heard? I'd open that up for discussion.
Could you just repeat that list one more time?
It's on the agenda.
Addressing homelessness with
Thank
this, and so under addressing the homelessness, keeping persons at risk of homelessness in their housing, transitional housing, sheltering, and medical respite. Under affordable and attainable housing, we're looking at local zoning changes, a regional approach to 40B, potentially pooling Community Preservation Act funds from each of the towns, and the involvement of the private sector and the business community. Workforce housing, looking at seasonal and year-round housing, and then regional planning, the need for regional housing strategy, which has been proposed by the Cape Cod Commission. As an update, I think for the committee, it's probably important to review that the assembly, was it last week? It seems like it was last month.
Commissioners approved the commissioners approved it, sent to the assembly sent it back, the commissioners approved it yesterday. So the regional housing study has been approved for ARPA funding.
So the regional housing study has been approved for ARPA funding, and the 5 million for the small medium grants program has been, which was a unanimous vote in the Assembly of Delegates. So I think that was a welcome result, and things seem to be working pretty well there. So that's good. So the housing study has been funded. The water quality study still needs to be voted, right?
No, it was approved.
Okay.
Well, another public hearing, excuse me. At the assembly, there'll be a public hearing.
But we're almost there.
We're almost there.
So, given that the agenda of this committee has been to have that freshwater ponds study funded, the housing study as a component of this, the water quality and housing, and the 5 million for the small and medium grants program, we're doing pretty good. We're doing pretty good. So now it's time to move into what these recommendations are going to look like on the housing side. I know in the past, Dan has sort of referenced a roadmap for housing. And so I think what I would be interested in hearing from the committee members is maybe what the components of the report might look like and the recommendations back to the commissioners as it relates to housing. Do we think we're ready based on the testimony that we've had to put something in draft form?
Hi all. Continue to have technical difficulties here. Paul will be back on screen in a minute. Can you guys hear me? Nice. I do apologize. Did you run out of power?
Yeah.
Want to use mine?
Let's be back up.
Are you good now? It's plugged in. Have it down there. Okay.
You get power.
Yeah.
Could take a 5-minute journey.
This is either going to work or it's leaving. Let's see.
And when Paul
While we're
is,
waiting, we can all muse upon the proposition Paul just mentioned, which would be are we ready for submit recommendations to the commissioners and also to discuss components of a final report.
so may I ask for a little bit of clarification, Vera? I'm just having, and my colleagues are nodding. So I think I'm lacking some clarity about what this question is. And, we've just identified that the housing study has been funded. So what specifically are you asking us relative to making recommendations to the commissioners in terms of housing? I just, if you could provide a little bit more specificity.
I think we've discussed housing recommendations in the form of this layer cake approach to housing, at least identifying these areas that are identified on the agenda today as areas that the commissioners should consider funding proposals from.
Oh, thank you. So what if I hear you correctly, what you're saying is we'd actually be defining categories for the solicitation of specific proposals. And it would be in the addressing homeless, affordable and attainable housing and workforce housing arenas with a specificity that is detailed under each one of those on the agenda?
Yeah, so, so today I think we're looking to see if there are any gaps in any of those areas that anything that we've left out before we move to sort of the drafting stage, to draft some of the recommendations for this committee's consideration and for an additional public hearing. On the housing side, it's a little bit more challenging because I think some of these recommendations may be to solicit through an RFP recommendations from larger community, and some of them might be internal to county government itself. Kristen, I see you have your hand raised.
Thanks, Paul. So kind of back to, the idea of this roadmap and some specificity, the content of what we might be sharing with the commissioners. Would this be the place where we could potentially include either potential partners or leaders? Again, not pigeonholing anybody in or making any promises, but just, I think the more that we can sort of suggest the likelihood that there are, or maybe that's where some of the gaps are and sort of who would take the lead on some of these things. Is that what you're hoping we'd be able to include in the report as well?
Yeah, I think that would be, an essential part of the report is to identify potential strategic partners and identify the partners that could carry out some of the functions and suggestions that we've heard through the public testimony. Again, some cases that could be the county government itself internally. In other cases, it might have to be organizations external to county government. All right, so I'm going to take that as a confirmation that we have a good list and we can start to draft from that something more specific. Karen.
I know there are other
Sean,
people.
Sean actually had his hand up first.
Sean and Dorothy, and then.
Hi, Sean. Go ahead.
Thank you. Just a further clarification. When you say report, you mean a report as it relates only to the housing challenge, and there'll be a series of other reports as it relates to other challenges, correct? Or are you talking about the whole enchilada here?
It's really at the discretion of the committee what form the report would take back to the commissioners. But what is clear is that what we're focusing on now are the two major regional challenges that we prioritized in housing and water quality. So there could be a housing report that would include a set of recommendations in an overall sense of giving a housing roadmap. There would also be then at least a separate section of the report or a separate report itself on water quality, as I understand what we've been able to accomplish to date.
Okay, so I
Is that
guess
responsive?
it is, and I guess my follow-up would be whatever report that we ultimately deliver, whether it's iterative and serial or what have you, or one report with recommendations. I think it's important that we say that we don't create the impression that we're only making recommendations in these two areas, that we need to say something about each of the things that we considered, including some context and background as it relates to smaller grants, mid-sized grants, et cetera.
Good, Ben.
Got everything turned off. So they can't hear me. If I turn my microphone on, it's gonna, if you guys can turn.
Paul, turn yourself.
Okay. We have a lot of feedback.
Can you move to another computer?
Well, no, everybody in the room with Beth needs to just mute their mic.
Yeah.
Right,
And mute their speakers.
Yeah.
right.
Go.
I forgot what I was going to say. No. Okay, so what I was going to just say, Sean, is that, we just put forth, a pretty well-developed, recommendation around the small and the medium grants, which were 5 million. So that recommendation, we took what the committee did, we put together something in writing, we presented that to the commissioners, and it's gone through the process at the county level. It has now been approved. We're moving forward with doing bidders conferences and ramping that whole process up for the small and medium size grants. I just want to make sure we're all clear about where we are. Then for housing and water, to answer your question, I think like Paul said, I think we could either do a combined report or do two separate reports / recommendations to the commissioners based on the testimony that's come out of these meetings. I would offer that I think we may want to do them separately because the water, I think, is a bit more defined. I think the housing area needs, I think, a little bit more work because there's such a variety of things that could be funded. Most of them would not be potentially county projects. And so I think we need to think through the recommendations around, if we look at this on a continuum, or some of them we go out for RFPs. Some of them the committee says, yes, this is a project, we think would fit under the housing. So I think it might make sense to approach it in two different recommendations. So we can move forward on one while we continue to develop the other. So that's just food for thought.
Got it. No, I appreciate that. And I guess just if you humor me just for one more thing. So what I'm thinking about in particular is as it relates to rescue plan funds in various other, communities and counties, broadband has always been a significant chunk of that funding. And we're saying nothing about it whatsoever, it appears. And so what I'm asking is, as it relates to, and we've already discussed about how, there's not a whole lot here, in terms of resources and as it can be applied to potential broadband related initiatives in the region. On the other hand, I'm wondering what explicitly are we saying to the commission about the potential for communities or applicants to apply for small or medium grants around some projects that they may have as broadband related. That's essentially what I'm saying. And how would they how would they know that?
Yeah, that's a good point, Sean. So I think my recommendation is that we do need to sort of encapsulate the work of the committee in addressing all 6 regional challenges. And so I do think in part of the report back to the commissioners, we've got to lay out, even though we've made iterative suggestions on funding to start that process, we've got to encapsulate the explanation for that as part of an overall sort of generalized report. The county, it has a bidders conference set up for the 5 million. So I think a lot of the specific suggestions around that can be addressed at the bidders conference.
Broadband is among the things that can be funded.
Right.
Yeah.
But I do think that we do need to put together at least this preface that addresses the work of the committee and all 6 regional challenges. And I think that makes sense as a logical next step. I think Beth's point to the water quality sort of suggestions maybe being easier to organize and more internal to Barnstable County government may suggest that we do that as the next iteration. Not that we want to push off the biggest challenge in housing until the end, but I do think that those housing recommendations are going to require another public hearing and sharing and socializing that a little bit more. So thank you for that, Sean. I think that is a good sequence to move in. Dorothy.
Well, the good news is Sean asked a lot of the questions that I had relative. So when we think about that oversized spreadsheet and the report relative to the small and medium sized grant, your point is, those 6 are in there, but I completely agree with how you just recapitulated that, Paul, which is next steps need to embrace all of those. And then, go into housing and fresh water. I think that is appropriate and important context, rather than, sort of narrow it. So I think Sean's points are well taken. The other thing that Sean brings up, except it's tangential to, from my perspective, housing is, and again, I may be repeating the same question I had earlier, which is, the housing study has been funded. Kristen brought up the fact that it might be very efficacious to go ahead and do RFPs with kind of the usual suspects that we know have capacity to undertake critical pieces of this, and that makes sense. At the same time, the housing study, as I understand it, is going to provide data for needs and gaps. But one of the things that's become at least clear from my perspective, perhaps others, is that the organization, the road mapping and organizational management of addressing the critical housing challenges, there sort of isn't an organizational gap. And so as we think about specific projects, and then, as Romanet 4 is regional planning, I guess I'm just trying to understand again, is this all are the recommendations going to be specific to kind of getting RFPs out for bidders relative, or encouraging bidding for specific projects? Is there going to be any thought to that forward-leaning road mapping with a more consolidated view for the community? So sorry to go on, but I hope I've explained what my question is.
I think so. Thank you, Dorothy. I would, what I've taken from the discussions that we've had on housing in the public hearing is that I think what we should promote is this continuum of housing needs that deals with homeless, housing instability, affordable and attainable housing, market rate, workforce. Because I don't think that's been done for the Cape in any one document. So kind of today, getting those categories and that approach is necessary for us to move into more of the specifics. And I do think when we break that up into some of the suggestions that we've heard, some of those are organizational and can happen at the county level. And other of them are going to involve other agencies and organizations on the Cape that we've heard from. In addition to that, there will be gaps. And so I think it's really the role of this committee to judge whether the roles that have maybe been suggested for the county are appropriate or need to be augmented, the roles in those issue areas that we have existing organizations we think can execute plans there, and whether that's appropriate. But I think probably most importantly to identify the gaps that might still remain. So I think that would be the logical next step on housing, and I hope that is responsive to your statement, Dorothy.
It is, and that makes a lot of sense. Thank you, Paul.
Well, you also talked about the short term, medium term.
Yes. Yeah, there will be, in addition to these, and we have played around with a little bit of a Venn diagram because some of these issue areas sort of do overlap, but there's also sort of a chronological approach too. So what are those immediate needs that could be addressed? What are those more medium term needs that could be addressed? And what are the long term needs? So almost on an XY axis with a Venn diagram in the middle, if that makes any sense. So that's sort of the framework on the housing discussion that we've been working with. Karen.
Yes, so I'm not sure that I can articulate any question beyond what was already discussed. I'm just having a little bit of problem following the timing of everything and how it all puts together. So I know that we're under a certain timeline with ARPA funding. I also am super excited about the regional housing study, as you know. It almost feels to me like we're, regardless of what those results are, we're going to do other things that we feel that are priority based on the testimony, which is okay, but are we considering these just completely separate? I'm just struggling a little bit with that.
Yeah. As am I.
Okay.
So the,
And is
the
there a
housing-
timeline for the study?
there is a timeline for the study. But it could be spring months. So clearly that starts to put us up against a wall. So I think unfortunately, although it's not a linear process, I think we are going to have to move on parallel tracks here to address the housing issue. And so that's not going to be the most straightforward approach, but probably the most effective and the only one that we have available to us. So
Acknowledging that we need a roadmap. We still have the more near-term deadline of funding ARPA or of expenditure, deciding what to spend ARPA funding on. And this is with regard to housing in ways that we can add value in this more confined funding space. So I think that sets up sort of this temporal difference between, yes, longitudinal planning that's comprehensive and so on, but at the same time, what can we get started with
yeah.
now and get some ARPA funding flowing toward that?
Yes, and I think as we start to take this continuum that we've agreed on, that has these issue areas, comprehensive sort of spectrum of issue areas and a timeline associated with it, it will allow us to associate money, like how much is it going to take if we wanted to do something meaningful on attainable housing. If zoning changes are something that we need to prioritize, what are going to be the resources associated with that? Because we're going to come up with on both the water quality and the housing side, a list of potential areas that we would need to invest a certain amount of money in order to move the dial. And we may not be able to fund it all. So that would force then, again, a prioritization, sort of a sub-prioritization of that issue area. The study is going to be important. I personally think the study is going to be most instructive on the issue of gaps, where there might be gaps. And to Sean's earlier point about getting some sort of a preface report in front of the commissioners that outlines the 6 regional challenges and what we've heard, I think that needs to move. Maybe the housing piece is the last piece, and we can address that in the first sort of preface report by just saying that there's going to be more time to focus on housing. So that would be my sense. Dan.
Yeah, at the risk of blowing myself up, I got in at 3 o'clock in the morning, so I apologize for being a little bleary-eyed, but I'm having an Admiral Stockdale moment here. I apologize, but we go from being, you know, the structure and process of this group goes from being an assistance and guidance and some insight from people who have had a lot of experience, history, and involvement in the community to being an encumbrance, because we're meeting every 2 weeks and this thing needs to move at a different pace and at a different level of understanding and granularity than we have the capacity at every 2-week meetings. So I'm getting concerned, and Paul, you said sort of, okay, you know, we're going to wrap things up here. Maybe we already have. I mean, I thought that we came together to identify areas that need to be priority areas for the county, and then sort of volley that back to the people who are doing this every day, who can actually put meat on the bones and come up with specific processes through which to dispense the resource. And so I think, you know, and again, I apologize because I know it's a recorded meeting. I'm being a little bit careful, but I'm not sure that we're actually being that helpful anymore. I think or if we're going to be helpful going forward, we need to engage in a different way. I guess because I'm hearing a lot of really smart people spinning their wheels today. And that always concerns me. So, you know, maybe we need to have a more global discussion about, you know, what our work really is going to be relative to the going forward. We're not going to be evaluating specific proposals, right?
No.
So we've sort of set the table for where we think the focus needs to be. You know, it is assessing need, as you say, it's all about gap, right? It's assessing need, it's identifying solutions and resources. And then I'm going to put a third thing in there, which is funding. And all of this needs to be part of it. How are we going to pay for any of this? Because it's not just the ARPA money. We're trying to put in motion solutions that are going to cost a lot more than the money we have, than the ARPA money going forward. We want sustainable, you know, projects, if you will. But I don't feel like what we're doing is really going to be able to shed a lot of light, specificity, granularity, whatever, on any of those at this point, other than doing what we've done. Sorry.
No, I mean, it's good feedback.
Now, just as a follow-up, one of the things we could do is take specific proposals from the county staff who is working on this on a daily basis and opine on that if you want. But we as a group don't have the capacity to actually do any of that work.
Wendy.
What Dan said, but my point was not on the chart that I see here. I think what we should put at the top of the list is we need a regional coordinator for this housing activity pronto, you know, and I spent half of my life working for the business community, and I know government does not work at the speed of business, but we kind of need to look at that now because the clock is ticking on this ARPA money. But I think people get work done. So a regional coordinator, I hear it at the local level that's what we need is a regional housing coordinator. Can't even wait for the housing study to be done. Can we identify a person, get them on board, work with the housing study, but just get feet on the streets sooner rather than later? All the other items that are on the agenda for housing, I think are valid, are fine, but there's a lot of gaps that I see. So I'm voting for a regional coordinator fast.
Is that a motion?
So are you suggesting that that gets paid for out of the ARPA funds?
Yes.
Okay.
So I think all 15 towns would benefit from it, and certainly residents that could get housing faster would.
But is that something that this committee should be recommending to someone? I mean, from a process standpoint.
Why not? All I
So
can say is thanks.
So was that a motion to make a recommendation, which somebody might
Yes.
want a second, like me?
Well, I move that we recommend that a portion of our ARPA funds go to the creation of a new post as a housing coordinator for the region that helps build capacity, helps the towns with their plans. I mean, leave it a little bit broad, but I think that that's what we need to use some of this ARPA money for immediately to get the housing effort.
Hey, Wendy, if I might, I'd love to hear from Beth as to whether we have that capacity currently or whether that would be useful to you before I second it.
You
Certainly,
second it, and then we debate it.
It has to be seconded for discussion, right?
Oh.
Yeah, do we have a
Yeah.
second on Wendy's motion for discussion?
Who seconded?
Dan.
Thank you.
It's seconded.
Okay.
So what I would say was one of the proposals that was put forth out of the home advisory group, which has a representative from each of the 15 towns, was exactly that, to work on some of these technical assistance to towns, et cetera, and taking to doing some of that work. The regional housing strategy, the commission is undertaking, right? And this is going to take, you know, let's just say 9 to 12 months, right? That's how long these things take. So I think we do need to think about this as parallel. I think we could move forward, and I think it would be helpful. And it actually is something that, again, came out of a recommendation from an advisory group that has representation from the 15 towns.
Ask for clarification.
Go ahead.
clarification of the motion, Wendy, are you is your motion include that the regional housing coordinator be situated at the county?
Yes.
Thank you.
But there's a motion and a second on the floor. And we'll
I'll
have to
call the roll
take a roll call.
for the motion. Dorothy?
Aye, and that's what I was trying to get to
Yes.
before.
I see you nodding in assent. Dan? If you all could unmute yourselves, it'd be useful.
I did.
Okay. Karen?
Aye.
Karen?
Yeah.
I
Wendy?
did vote aye.
Yes.
Sean?
Aye.
Is everyone muted? Is everyone, and Kristen?
Aye.
Aye. All right, so we have a
Lisa
unanimous
is here.
vote.
Lisa is here now, Vera.
Lisa is,
No, Lisa, sorry.
I just arrived, but yes.
Okay, thank you. Motion passes.
Thank you.
excellent. So I think what's been suggested is oh, Sarah, you have your hand up.
I did. I just wanted to know.
Can I just say, Karen has had her hand up for about 8 minutes. So,
That's okay.
and if you look at the participant list, it's first. So just sorry, Paul.
I'm sorry, Karen, I thought you still had it up. My mistake.
no.
Please go ahead.
That's okay. I thought I was in your blind spot again. I
No,
apologize.
you're dead center today. I still missed it.
No, I wondered if, and it may not be possible, but I wondered if there's any portion of the regional housing study that we might be able to suggest be prioritized as we consider this list. And if that makes sense at all.
Yeah, I think it would make sense, and maybe this is what Sarah's going to address, is to ask the commission about the process and the scope of the regional housing study and what issues might be prioritized, whether it would be information available earlier rather than later. I don't think any of it's going to be, based on Dan's comments, available to this committee for our consideration. Sarah.
That was not what I was going to mention, but I did want to make you aware, if you were not, that the commission does have a current job position posted for a regional housing specialist. I think that touches on many of those things that Dorothy and Dan were noting. So I don't know if these two positions would intersect, but I just figured it was worth noting that we are looking for a regional housing specialist right now on staff.
Great, thank you.
You're welcome.
Let's not get into a bidding war for that person.
Figure it out.
Well, I will say regional housing, the commission has to have a housing person on staff. Hiring that position has always been somewhat of a challenge because your pool of applicants tends to be people with affordable housing advocacy as a base, and not necessarily from a development or community development perspective. So that's always been a challenge to do that. So it's easier said than done, but I think we can help that move along.
If I may, just clarification on that,
Yeah.
Paul. The position that's been discussed through the Home Advisory Committee, as Beth started out mentioning, would be distinct from the regional housing specialist. Pardon me, would be distinct from the regional housing specialist that the commission is currently hiring for. It would be an additional role.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Because the commission's going to need a regional housing specialist to review developments of regional impact and other sort of functions that are specifically called out in the Cape Cod Commission Act, where I think Wendy's suggestion of a regional housing coordinator is really one that coordinates more with the local towns on housing production plans and other areas, like other issues like that. So I do think they are distinct.
Yeah, they are.
Okay, great. Lisa.
Not to backtrack on the conversation or the discussion portion of the vote, but I think would make sense to engage with those who were invited to participate in the last conversation, some of whom I believe are trying to do TA with towns on housing.
Yeah. No, I think that's a good suggestion. And I would anticipate, as I've heard from several of the housing entities that made testimony to this committee, that they would like an opportunity to discuss whatever recommendations we make to the commissioners prior to us making those recommendations. Dorothy.
And I'm really glad that Wendy made the recommendation she did. And we did hear about the recommendation from the home group last time, so that makes perfect sense that these are two different things. The housing specialist, to your point, Paul, very different than the regional housing coordinator. And as we look at the issue of short, intermediate, and long term and look at that XY thing, again, my broken record, hope that part of the analysis is evaluating, so what is this regional housing coordinator? What's the entity? And when you think about the housing needs on the Cape, if you only look at them on a town by town basis, which I think is important in the near term and the intermediate term, but on a holistic basis, some of the solutioning is going to have to be regional in nature. So I would hope that we expand the scope of this individual to not just be providing specific technical assistance to individual towns, but broadening that on a higher basis, leveraging the results of the housing study to look at what are the appropriate mechanisms for us to continue undertaking this enormous gap that we know that we have, which is just from a land use perspective is not going to be possible to holistically address on a town by town basis. Personal opinion there. Thank you.
Thank you. Dan.
Yeah, so if we wanted to refine that and make it part of our suggestion, what we would say is that person should identify regional solutions that need to be implemented locally. I mean, it's because the real issue I think we have is the regional understanding and the regional solutions, but the understanding that they really need to be worked at through the town structure. So I don't know how directive we want to be with this position. And the only other thing I would throw out is, do we want to take a similar approach to the water quality issue, to whether it's freshwater or overall? I mean, and again, I look to Beth for that because, and I would suggest that both of these positions need to identify sources going forward to make it a permanent position, because we can't suggest a permanent position without recommending funding.
Right.
So would it be helpful to have a similar approach on the water end?
I think, and I like it. Yeah, conceptually, because of the limitations of the capacity of this committee and the work that we've done so far in prioritizing housing and water quality as issues number one and number two, recognizing that the county is going to have a major role in both, that the recommendation that a housing coordinator and a water quality coordinator positions be considered to help further sort of suss out the specifics of these recommended strategies. So Beth is supportive.
Yes. It's hard to, yeah. No, I think conceptually, I think that makes a lot of sense, and it is something that I think would be helpful in moving forward the coordination around the water quality, the operational side of it, as well as some of the bigger thinking planning that needs to take place.
Great. Okay.
So I would make that I would make that as a recommendation as well, and I would make it as a motion.
So there's a
I'll
motion on the
second it.
floor. Wendy
second.
seconds it. So we'll have a roll call. Any discussion on the creation of a water quality coordinator?
Paul, sorry, but the only thing I would say is, how directed do we want to be relative to regional understandings, regional solutions, and local, working with the towns for local implementation? I mean, that's pretty broad, but I do think, Beth, I actually think, Beth, whatever's helpful to you relative to identifying what the position is and who, what we're looking for. would be part of our recommendation. And I don't know whether you want to think about it, come back to us with a description that we can.
Yeah, conceptually, it makes sense. I think there needs to be some more thinking through as to what the scope would be. If you want to get that specific, but conceptually, absolutely, I think it makes a lot of sense.
There's the motion and it's been seconded. Shall I call the roll?
Please.
Dorothy?
Aye.
Oh,
Can you
sorry. Yeah, it's me calling the roll. Dan?
Yeah,
Aye.
okay.
Karen?
Aye.
Wendy?
Aye.
Sean?
Aye.
Kristen?
Aye.
Lisa?
Aye.
Thank you. Motion carries unanimously.
Great. Thank you. So I think what we have on our to-do list moving forward now is to sort of outline at least the preface of a report back to the commissioners that identifies the discussions we've had on all 6 regional challenges and give some format to that. There's a recommendation for a housing coordinator, regional housing coordinator position, or regional water quality coordinator position that Beth is going to give thought to the specifics about and come back to us on that. And we have a structure, I think an outline for the scope of what this housing coordinator position would look at with some specific recommendations. And we also have a similar outline on the water quality side. So I think what we might want to consider as a committee is taking some time to put that in writing in some sort of format for us to consider, and postponing our next meeting or convening our next meeting on September 8th. That would give us about 3 weeks to put something in writing for your consideration to see if we've properly encapsulated the work of the committee to date, where we think it needs to go, and whatever additional meetings might be required. So I don't think we need a vote on that. That would just be my suggestion if there isn't any additional input. And with that, we've really come to the close of the agenda today, which was a bit haphazard and technically difficult. And having my own admiral moments here, having driven back from Montreal last night. So we'll, and Robin's not here, which is disturbing. But we I think are ready to move forward. I think there's been some really useful input by the committee today. So I want to thank you for your input and for sticking with us
Thank you, Paul.
through this hour. And with that, I would entertain a motion to adjourn.
So moved.
To adjourn.
Second.
Roll call.
Wendy and Dorothy.
Aye.
Dan.
Aye.
Wendy.
Aye.
Kristen.
Aye.
Lisa.
Aye.
Sean.
We, or I.
Oui. Ah, merci beaucoup.
Montreal.
Ah, and Karen.
Aye.
Yeah. Thank you all.
Happy birthday,
Thanks,
Dan.
everyone.
Happy birthday.